If you're ever unhappy with your own performance as a parent, if you ever think that you didn't handle a situation particularly well, and hopefully that's all parents who realize that that happens, right? We're human, we're not perfect, to reflect on it as you suggested. And here's the part that takes some courage. Own it, go back to your child. There is no statute of limitations on apologies. You want to talk about good modeling? Model this kind of humility, model reflection.
Hello, and welcome to episode 84 of the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. I'm your host, Brittney-Nichole. Today, I will be interviewing Dr. Chris Thurber, and he is the co-author to the book, The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure. So a few episodes ago, I interviewed Dr. Hank Weisinger, who he co-authored the book with. And so today's just kind of a second part, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper and get Dr. Thurber's perspective. So Dr. Thurber is a thought leader in positive youth development. He has dedicated his professional life to improving how caring adults teach and lead young people and to enhancing the experience of adventurous young people who are spending time away from home. A graduate of Harvard University and UCLA, Chris has served as a psychologist and instructor at Phillips Exeter Academy since 1999. An entrepreneur from a young age, Dr. Thurber founded Prep4Camp and Prep4School to teach young people how to prevent intense homesickness and make joyful, successful transitions to boarding school and summer camp. One of Chris's first Prep4 videos won a Telly Awards for Best Non-Broadcast Instructional Video. Camps and schools on 5 continents have invited Dr. Thurber to deliver keynotes, contribute articles, and lead workshops for faculty, families, staff, and students. His award-winning preparatory book for new campers families, The Summer Camp Handbook, was recently translated into Mandarin to help launch the youth camp movement in China. His latest book, which we'll be talking about today, which will be available July 20th, is The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure, a positive approach to pushing your child to be their best self. Chris's writings have won several awards, including a National Parenting Press Gold Award and Golden Quill Award. Dr. Thurber has appeared on The Today Show, CBS This Morning, Martha Stewart, CNN, Fox, Canada AM, Beijing 57, and NPR. And he's been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Boston Globe. I mean, the list goes on. So I'm going to put Dr. Thurber's entire bio into the show notes so you can find out more about him. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. He just had, you could tell the passion, but just the energy. It was a fun energy. So without further ado, here's the wonderful interview with Dr. Chris Thurber. Enjoy. Welcome. Dr. Chris Thurber is with us today on the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. He is the co-author to the book, The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure, with Dr. Hank Weisinger, who was on the podcast, I believe, 3 shows back, potentially. I'll have to put that in the show notes for everyone. So this is kind of a second round of that conversation with the co-author. But before we dive into that, I would love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers, Dr. Thurber.
Absolutely. Well, Brittany, thanks for having me. So my name is Dr. Chris Thurber. I am a clinical psychologist by training. I live in Exeter, New Hampshire with my wife, who is a chemist, and my 2 boys, who are 16 and 18. And I have worked as a clinician here at Phillips Exeter Academy, which is a co-educational independent school here on the Seacoast. We're about an hour north of Boston. And I see students for individual psychotherapy sessions, and I teach a psychology class. And then my sort of side gig, weekends and in the summers, is to work with other independent schools and also summer camps. So I would consider myself not just an author, but a youth development professional, and really committed to helping the professional development of other folks, teachers, staff, faculty, boarding staff, camp counselors, anyone who's looking to support the development of young people. And you mentioned Hank, my co-author on The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure. Hank and I met about 4 years ago when we were both developing some online learning materials. And he told me about the book he'd written for business people, which was called Performing Under Pressure, and what he'd found in the research that he'd done, that actually high pressure situations somewhat paradoxically do not lead to better performance. And he wanted to know, in my work as a school psychologist, did I ever encounter secondary school students who were under a lot of pressure? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, well, what do you think about this whole paradox thing? And I said, that's for sure true. There's healthy pressure and unhealthy pressure. And we just got to talking, and Hank proposed that we do some more research and write together. So that's been a lot of fun. So I'll add author to my bio. I've also written book chapters and articles, and my other book is the Summer Camp Handbook, which is sort of a guidebook for new camper families looking for the right summer camp for their child, and how to spot markers of good quality camps and prevent homesickness, which was what my dissertation research was on. And that's Chris Thurber in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. And I think we agreed Chris is okay for this, right? So I'm going to call you
Yeah.
Chris throughout this, but
Yeah.
I
Oh, yeah,
recognize you're not.
absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, when you talk about the pressure that comes in secondary schooling, I think during those years of my life, that was the most stressed out,
Mm,
miserable that I've ever been in my life.
yeah.
I know that a lot of adults would always say, what are you so upset and stressed about? You don't even know what stress is. Just wait until you're an adult. And
Right.
what people don't realize is that it doesn't matter what situation it is, it's all about your personal experience. That feeling is true to you,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. And that's one of the points that Hank and I make in the book, is that, of course, parents and other caregivers can do some introspection and try to be as objective as they can about what kind of a job they're doing in general. And of
Mhm.
course, I do it as a parent. I know my wife does it as a parent, that we reflect at the end of the day, or in the middle of the day for that matter, how did that conversation go, or how am I handling this situation? And I know that loving parents all do that. I think that what you said is also true, in that the only person who can actually say whether the pressure they're feeling is uncomfortable or comfortable, healthy or unhealthy, is the child, is the adolescent. And
The
so,
person experiencing that feeling. Yeah.
exactly, the person who's experiencing that feeling. So it's, as I said, it's common that parents will self-evaluate quietly, or maybe with their partner or spouse or trusted friend. It's very uncommon that they would ask their child, is this comfortable for you? And not, do you think I'm doing a good job, or is this the right thing, or the sort of parental aphorism of, I know better, or I told you
Right.
so, or like you said to the adults in your life were saying, oh, you think you're stressed now, wait till you have a mortgage or something like that. And it's not, of course the circumstances change, but I think many people would say, Brittany, what you said, which is that the combination of unknowns and unknown future and academic, athletic, artistic, and social pressure that impinges on a young person in middle school and high school is more intense than perhaps any other time in their life.
Yeah, for sure. And even elementary for me, I think
Mm,
that's where it really started. Once you start doing that third grade testing, at least, I was in
right.
public school.
Yeah.
I don't know how private schools are, but that's where everything went downhill. I started being pulled out for special classes. Then I got bullied for being in the special classes. I had
Oh,
testing
wow.
pressure. So
Yeah.
it was kind of a snowball effect. And parents don't know what to do.
Yes.
And well, I don't want to say all parents, right? But my parents didn't know what to do in that situation. They didn't like to see that I was struggling. They also didn't want to hold me back because they thought, oh, well, we don't want her to be held back. That looks
Hmm.
bad. she won't be with her same peer group. And I think too, some parents, it's kind of, they don't want to say that their child had to be held back,
Yes.
right? So there's, yeah. So gosh, there's so many places we can go with this book. So let's talk about the research
Hmm.
that you did for this book, because in this book you have so much data, so many examples. What have you found with children that have been under this immense amount of pressure from their parents? What is the outcome to that? And what is the percentage of children that feel the need to, I hate to bring this up, but take their own life,
Hmm.
or want to run away from home, have mental breakdowns, like the serious repercussions of this? What does that
Yeah.
look like? And what are the warning signs?
Mm. Well, so there are several questions in what you asked, and I'll start by saying that um, we should probably define the distinction between healthy and unhealthy
Yeah.
pressure, because the premise that Hank and I begin with, and we discovered in our research, and I should say as a footnote that although we've done each of us at different times in our careers our own data collection and empirical research. The research that we did for The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure was literature review, looking at articles and reports that were published in peer review journals or by government agencies like Department of Health. And that's the most reliable data that you can put your fingers on. And what we found was, first of all parents apply pressure. It's instinctive. We want, as primary caregivers, and I'll use the word parents throughout this interview in the way that we do in the book. We're referring to um, that person or those people who are the primary caregivers. Some people were raised by an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, or a foster parent. They all play that parent role. So,
Mhm.
well, I'll use the word parent, even when there are times, of course, when it's not the biological parent. But
Right.
when parents love their kids, they want the best for them. That is instinctive, and not just in humans, but in other mammals and non-mammals, other animals. The point is that it's misdirected to be asking how much pressure is too much. That's been the question that journalists and psychologists and parents have been asking for millennia. The proper question is, what kind of pressure, or how should the pressure be applied? And that's what Hank and I really discovered in our research, was that when outcomes are defined very narrowly, and a classic example would be you have to go to this school. Um,
Mhm.
Otherwise, I wouldn't consider it a success, and neither should you. Um, when those are very high stakes outcomes, when parents' approach is cold, when their lives are interwoven with their child's life in an invasive kind of way, the coldness, the invasiveness, and especially the narrowly defined outcomes are the main ingredients of what we would call unhealthy pressure.
Mhm.
But parents shouldn't shy away from applying pressure, because there is a healthy version of pressure which is focused more on effort than outcome, and focused more on uh, a warm and collaborative interaction and relationship with your child, and of course keeping track of what they're doing in an age appropriate way, but giving them some freedom in how they form relationships and what they do in their lives. And so, to answer your question about mental health, we found that rates of anxiety and depression, and even, as you said, suicidality, whether that's suicidal ideation, thinking about suicide, or actually making attempt, or actually taking your own life, are greater if the style of parenting is this unhealthy pressure style, again, that combines very narrowly defined outcomes and an authoritarian style and an invasive sort of enmeshed relationship. And so, boy, it sounds like a lot. Where would you start? I think anyone listening, including me listening right now to my own voice, thinking, oh, well, gee, there's probably some things I could do to sort of tune up my parenting. And of course, it's true for me and for every other parent, which is why Hank and I wrote the book. And in the book, we talk about 8 different approaches, or what we call transformations, that transform unhealthy pressure to healthy pressure, to give parents a lot of different entry points. If you think, okay, this doesn't really sound possible for me, but this feels doable, then you start there. So
Yeah.
it's, the solution is got a lot of different opportunities for parents, but um, it has been difficult to read some of the research, knowing that, and not just in the United States, but in other countries as well, when students or young people who are feeling an intense amount of this unhealthy pressure um, report on their own mental health, it's pretty abysmal. And the pandemic has only made it worse for different reasons.
Yeah.
I would, happy as we all are that it looks like we're on the tail end of this, lonely quarantine and all the other restrictions that it's put on us. And it's had some positive sides too. But what that points out is there are pressures that don't come from parents that can also feel really, unhealthy and contribute to symptoms of anxiety and depression. And I just think that that's important to point out, not just the pandemic, but other things too, the way that college admissions are set up, or the pressure that a person's peers put on them. So I think it's important for your listeners to understand, in the unlikely art of parental pressure, even though the focus is parental pressure, we recognize, and we have chapters about all the other pressures that kids feel that, as you said, contribute to, in some cases, pretty significant mental health problems.
Right. Let's talk about the role that emotional intelligence plays in this.
Mm.
Because for me personally, that changed everything for me. When I started to become self-aware of why I was reacting the way that I was reacting, and that I had control over the way I chose to feel about things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really hard for people to wrap their heads around, because they're like, well, most people would get anxious over that. Most people, that would make angry, because most of us were conditioned the same way. Most of us have the same scripts of, this is what is appropriate, this is what is not appropriate, this is what should make you feel proud of yourself, and this is what you should feel poorly about if you perform this way. So I think that's why a lot of us react the same way. But when you really dive deep into it, it's not that external force that is causing that feeling. It
Mm-hmm.
is how you interpret that and apply that to the self. And once you realize that you're your own little kind of entity inside and you have all this control, I mean, it makes a world of difference. But the problem is, we're not taught that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what you don't know. So how do you see emotional intelligence being integrated? I know that Mark Brackett has been doing things within the school systems. Other school systems, I don't know if you've heard of 6 Seconds. They're an
I haven't yet.
organization on emotional intelligence. And Daniel Goleman actually did some research with Joshua Freeman, the CEO, and they integrated that into the book,
Mm.
Emotional Intelligence. So this has been going on since the early 90s, but it's not mainstream. And the question is, why isn't it mainstream? Why do you think school systems are resistant to this? Again, I
Mm.
gave you a loaded question there with multiple questions. I tend to do that. I apologize.
No, it's great.
Um,
And you gave an amazing, succinct summary of emotional intelligence and the importance of appraisal, or how we interpret things, which, as you know, is also a cornerstone of cognitive behavioral therapy. And Daniel Goleman's done amazing research. I don't know about 6 Seconds yet, but I do know about Daniel's research, and have learned a lot from what he's written. What what Hank and I say in The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure is, and we go back and review a little bit of the research on emotional intelligence as it relates to parenting style. And one wonderful finding that's quite reliable, starting with Baumann's research at University of California, Berkeley, decades ago, is that when parents engage their children in emotional conversations that take into account not just the young person's emotions, but also the parents' emotions and the emotions of third parties, that begins to create the self-awareness that you're talking about,
Yeah.
right? And Michael Thompson's another psychologist with whom I'm good friends, and his research, for example, looking at the difference between how parents, whether they identify as male or female or gender fluid, those parents are more likely to talk with, still in 2020, there hasn't been research published in 2021 on this, but I imagine it didn't suddenly stop on January 1st. They're more likely to talk to their daughters about emotions and what's going on around them than they are to their sons. And that's, I'm painting this with a very broad brush because, of course, there are many, many exceptions. But one answer to your question is the emotional intelligence of kids in general is lagging because of what you said. We're not taught this in an explicit way early enough, and we don't know what we don't know. And boys, generally speaking, in developed Western societies are more likely to be at a disadvantage or to take longer to acquire some of these emotionally intelligent skills. But a perfect example is, parents shopping with their child in the grocery store, and you have one of those sort of embarrassing, awkward moments when you have to push your cart down the aisle past another family unit, parent and child, where the child is just decompensating. They want the sugar cereal and the parents saying no, and they're having this power struggle, and it's one of those knockdown, drag out temper tantrums. Now, some parents would just sort of quietly wheel their cart by and not a word said about it. Other parents might say, after, they get past what is, a normal parental or a normal parent-child interaction. Normal. We hope it doesn't happen often, but it does happen to all of us. But if a parent says, Brittany, I wonder why that mommy was so upset, or why that boy looked really tearful. I wonder what was bothering him. Or, that mom and dad seemed to be arguing with their child. I wonder what they were arguing about. Or that daddy seemed really upset. What do you think was going on? Right? I mean, and if any parents listening think to themselves, well, I don't know. I've never asked that. That sounds weird. Like, you're right, because you probably don't. But that's part of what delays the acquisition of the kind of emotional intelligence that you're talking about. And it doesn't have to be an upsetting thing either. You could be sitting with your child watching
just a curious observer.
Exactly. You're watching a cartoon or a sitcom or something. It can be something joyous, but, why did SpongeBob laugh? Or, what's going on with, I'm dating myself, Bugs Bunny. And when parents are inquisitive like this and engage their children in conversations about emotions, other people's emotions, their own emotions, their child's emotions, then you have this real life scaffolding that starts to build a data set of experiences that the kids then learn a lot from. And without that, we can still acquire emotional intelligence and learn a lot. But as you said, it can be delayed, and there's no reason to delay it. As soon as kids are verbal, as soon as they can speak, you can start talking to them about your own feelings, about other people's feelings. And again, in the research that Hank and I did, this kind of talking about emotions is part of what Denise Baumann's called authoritative parenting. So authoritarian is very bossy, just like the word would imply.
Can I interject for just a
Please,
second?
please.
So because you're going the direction that I want to go, but I want to kind of bring it back to the shopping cart incident before we kind of get to that point.
Yes.
So when you were talking about willing, your child, you're with your child and you say, hey, that mommy looked really sad, or, you know, observing and discussing. I think it's also important because some parents may will their child by and say, did you see how that kid was acting like a brat? If you ever act like that, this is what's going to happen to you. So it kind of goes back to that.
Yeah.
Be very conscious of what you're saying. Are you being an objective observer or subjective? Are you being judgmental or just curious? Because I think that's why we don't discuss emotions as much, because we feel guilty. It's like, oh, I don't want to talk about, when I misbehave because I feel like a bad person for doing that. So sorry, I just wanted to throw
No,
that in there
it's,
because I think it's so important to know the difference. And you talk about that in the
yeah.
book. You give examples because there's so many nuances to how we phrase things.
Yeah.
It's subtle
And I love
sometimes.
the example that you just gave. And here's why. If that parent says, did you see how bad that little boy or little girl was being? I mean, by the way, we could be talking about adolescence, right? Parents reading I don't know, school newspaper, and it says, some kid was thrown out because of marijuana use. That parent could say, did you read this article? If you ever do that, you know, getting kicked out of school is going to be your smallest problem,
Yeah.
you know? So those kinds of judgmental statements, and you can have a judgment about what's going on, but if that's all you're doing, you're very much focusing on the outcome. Like,
Mm-hmm.
here's what happened. If you were to do this, this would be the outcome for you, and it would be unacceptable. And we start to teach kids that emotions are not okay to talk about. We start to teach kids that there's only one acceptable outcome. We start to teach kids that there is this,
There's good
uh,
people and bad people,
right,
not good behavior and toxic or emotional. I don't want to say toxic. It can turn toxic, right?
it
It's not the
can,
emotion that's toxic.
correct.
It's how you handle that emotion that can
That's
become
right.
toxic.
That's
But
right.
we tend to label things as good and bad and
Yeah.
simply stop there.
Yeah. And I think that if parents want their kids, when they get older, especially in their adolescence or adults, and you're having an adult parent child relationship, if you expect that relationship to be close, and you want to know, as most parents do, what's going on with my kid, you've got to make it okay to talk about emotions. And as you just said, not label strong emotions, whether they're positive or negative, as bad or dangerous or something. And um, it's part of the pressure, the unhealthy pressure that many kids feel, that there's only one acceptable outcome.
Mhm.
So like you said, good, bad, very black and white, very dichotomous, not no room for some subtlety, some nuance, no room for I feel upset, but also a little bit hopeful. And like humans have these
Yeah.
complicated blends of emotions that you know we can't really regulate intelligently and in healthy ways unless we have some good guidance on that. And parents, again, it's not the only source of pressure, but we're focused on parents in this book because they play such a crucial role
Mhm.
in kids' development. And
Yeah.
I think that you know, just as a parent could say, "I wonder why that boy is sad," or "I wonder why that girl looks so happy," they can also ask an even more open-ended question, which is, "I wonder how that girl's feeling right now.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. How
wonder
do you
what's
think
going
she's
on. What
feeling?
is that boy thinking?" And like,
Yeah.
you don't have to have an answer, but it's so good to ask those questions. And um, again,
Critical
what's
thinking.
the big picture is that you're not teaching that there's only one acceptable way to behave, to one acceptable outcome. What I think parents want to do is not just teach emotional intelligence in these ways, but also focus their kids on effort and discovery, and there can be multiple positive outcomes of any situation, whether it's your baseball tournament or the college you're trying to apply to. And if kids think that there's only really one acceptable way to go, as you can imagine, they get very discouraged when they don't
Fit in
achieve
that
that.
box.
So there
Yeah.
you go. That's a recipe for anxiety before the event and depression after.
Yeah. So I will carry on where you left off since I interrupted you. I
Oh, it's
apologize
okay.
again. But I know it'll just leave me if I don't. So in the book you talk about the scale of, you have a diagram. I love all the diagrams, by the way, in the
Oh,
book.
thanks.
I'm a visual learner.
Me too.
So you talk about, let's see, the authoritative parent, the authoritarian parent, the uninvolved parent, and the permissive parent, and how there's low strictness and control and then demanding. You also talk about, what was the other? High warmth and responsiveness,
Hmm.
and then just kind of uninvolved, all together with, yeah. So I want to talk about those, and then, and I don't know which to start with first, because if we get too far gone, then I may forget it. So let me just start with this, so it's in your mind. I just watched a TV show last night. It was on YouTube, actually, about a new type of parent. And maybe it's not new, it's more of the permissive parent
Mm-hmm.
that's becoming more adopted. And this was in the UK. Parents are pulling their kids out of public schools, homeschooling them, or not having any schooling at all. And I have my thoughts about that, but they have no rules.
Mm.
It's all about, I want my kids to be happy. I want them to feel love and warmth and be creative and discover themselves without having these restrictions.
Hmm. Hmm.
Have you heard about that type of parent, the no rules parent?
I I haven't. I've heard about that type of parent. I haven't heard it labeled the no rules parent, but I know it as, sort of permissive style. Um, I'm
On the
sure it'll
extreme
get
end,
several
right?
nicknames. Yeah.
The extreme end. So, what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like because you were talking about there's good pressure too.
Hmm.
Do you feel like those parents put any pressure on their kids? You said all parents have
Mm.
some form of pressure, but what pressure do you see the permissive parent have in that?
Well, yeah. So as you said, the way that Diana Baumrind and others after her research in the late '60s have characterized parenting, of course, there are all different ways of thinking about it, but at least the I would say the most accurate way to think about it is along these two dimensions of, more control versus less control, more warmth versus less warmth. And if you think about a very demanding parent who doesn't show a lot of warmth, that's more of a bossy authoritarian style. And those kids tend to early on follow the rules, but later on rebel.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're missing, of course, is some interaction about independent decision making because they're always being told, do this. So being too
Right.
bossy as a parent isn't healthy. On the other hand, if you're permissive is the word that Diana Baumrind used, and subsequent researchers have, and that is, you know, a lot of warmth, but very little demandingness. So you pretty much let your kid within reason. I mean, these parents aren't letting their toddlers cross the street
Right,
without,
right, right.
holding their hand or something, but generally are letting them do what they want and also loving them and doting on them. And again, that can feel really good to kids for a limited period of time, but what they're missing is what you were talking about earlier, this acquisition of uh, self-regulation skills of being able to inhibit an impulse. I want that marshmallow, but I will wait because mom said or dad said um, we were going to have dinner first or something like that. So although those kids early on can be, happy and feel loved, they are emotionally dysregulated, as older children and adolescents because
Mhm.
they haven't had reasonable demands put on them and they haven't had a parent who's expressed some expectations and some standard. again, focused on effort, not on outcome. I want you to try your best. I want you to do this. That's a healthy kind of pressure. And again, praising kids for their efforts rather than just the outcome. If I saw that my child was studying for a math quiz for an hour and a half and reviewing questions and talking with, his friends about it and going to a study session and got a B minus, I would be very happy with that B minus, and I think he should be too, given how much effort he put in.
Right.
If he blew it off and didn't study and was playing video games and staying out past curfew and whatnot and got a B minus, I'd be very unhappy with that B minus. Why? Because he didn't put in the effort. So I worry with parents who are too permissive that they're not, of course they want the best for their kids and they're behaving in this permissive way because they think that is best. But what they'll discover if that is consistently their pattern is that they're raising children who can't inhibit their impulses and who can't self-regulate, who aren't able to regulate their emotions, and that's a problem when you get your
Right.
first job in an office or something. I'm just making up this example. And, you're making photocopies for your new supervisor
Oh,
and
you
the
are
copy
dating
machine jams.
yourself.
Yeah, like
Photocopies.
if you throw the ream of paper across the room or shout a bunch of expletives or kick
I
the
don't want to
copy
do it.
machine and break it,
Yeah.
yeah, like now you're out of a job. So we need
Right.
to acquire emotion regulation skills. So there is a balance. And I should say, all parents are at times bossy and all parents are at times permissive, but we should try to spend the most amount of our parenting time. And, now I'm going to use parenting in a very broad way. I'm talking about teachers, coaches, clergy, mentors, relatives, any important adult in that
Nannies.
child's life.
Yeah.
Yes, camp counselor, in this not authoritarian, not permissive, but the sort of balance is called authoritative, where yes, there are standards and expectations that are stated in a loving way, but the sort of hallmark of this authoritative style is that you engage your child in discussions about, well, this is why I'm asking you to do it, or tell me how you feel about this. And you're doing what we talked about a few minutes ago, helping to nurture emotional intelligence, but also you're giving an age appropriate amount of agency or decision making control to that child. So if they choose to do this, um, then there might be this outcome and the child will then experience that and know whether that was pleasant or unpleasant. And so again, classic example, it's raining outside, you say to your kid, you got to put on your raincoat. Kid says, no, I don't like my raincoat, it makes a funny noise when I move my arms, or it's too hot or something. The authoritarian parent would say, I don't care, put it on, or force the child to put it on. But an authoritative parent would say, well, let's take a second here. um, if we arrive at your friend's house and you're soaking wet, how is that going to feel for the rest of the day? um, but if your raincoat is uncomfortable, maybe you can think of something else that we could put on that would be more comfortable but protect you from the rain, because we have 6 blocks to walk. I mean, and again, this sounds different when you're talking with a teenager than if you're talking with a
Right.
toddler, but
Right.
in an age appropriate way, engaging your child in big and small decisions. And then there's a fourth kind of parenting, which is low warmth and low control, which is um, dismissive or
Yeah.
uninvolved,
Neglectful.
neglectful. Yeah, there are very
Yeah.
few parents, I think, who spend time in that quadrant, and it is usually, an indication of some other mental health issue when you're
Right.
just really not involved in parenting. But yeah, I mean, I'll say again, there are times when we do need to be authoritarian, when we need to just lay down the law, and there are times when you don't feel like cooking and your kid says, I want ice cream, and you just say, you know what, today for dinner is ice cream and let's enjoy it. But a special treat or a safety issue that dictates a kind of permissive or authoritarian style once in a while, fine. But as I said, we try to spend most of the time in this authoritative mode where we're applying healthy pressure.
Right. And when you talk about, authoritarian, the time for that, I would imagine it's more of, like you said, a safety thing. So it's like, no, you're not going to this party because I know from other parents that there's drugs and alcohol, and I
Right.
am not going to subject you to that type of environment.
Exactly.
I don't care if you tell me you're not going to do it. You're not going to be in that type of environment. It's less of the this is the school you're going to, period, kind of thing, and more
Right.
of I'm keeping you safe and out of harm.
And a key to what you just said is you're offering the rationale. So I'm not, it's not just because I said so. I'm going to be strict on this one, and here's why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I absolutely love this book. There's the thing that makes, to me personally, a good book. The things that I look for are obviously data. I love examples. You have so many examples of actual dialogue in the book because I
Mm,
think, again, as I talked to you about before, the nuances, the subtleties in how we talk to our kids, just a few words can change it all. And
yeah.
so parents being able to read this and say, oh, wow, I had no clue that if I just take these words out and plug these words in, that it changes everything about this communication style. And I think a lot of parents will really wake up when they read this book because, like you said, parents want the best for their kids, and you don't know what you don't know. So having those examples, having the data as well to say, oh, wow, I didn't realize that it impacted my child in this way. Here's the stats. And then
Yeah.
practical tools to apply this as well. One thing that I want to talk about, because you talk about paradoxes in the book,
Yeah.
and I want to bring it back to emotional intelligence again, because there's a paradox there as well. These parents that are more authoritarian uh, or uninvolved, or we do things because of something within ourselves too, right? If we're
Hmm.
not aware, we're projecting onto our kids. Sometimes we displace our emotions on our kids, all of these things. And it's not just about teaching the child to be aware of their emotions, but also connecting with yourself to say, why does this irritate me so much? Why is this a trigger for me? What is the underlying need behind that? I think that's super important. Can you talk about that? Like, what can parents do within themselves to really help prepare themselves so that they can teach this to their kids? Because we learn on modeling.
Yeah.
It's not do as I say, it's kids are going to do as you do.
Hmm.
So, how can parents be a model for their kids and look inside themselves and develop these skills of awareness and regulation?
Yeah. That's, one of my favorite things to talk about because I found it so helpful as a parent myself. And that is, first, your question, what can parents do? One of the things that parents can do is if you're ever unhappy with your own performance as a parent, if you ever think that you didn't handle a situation particularly well, and hopefully that's all parents who realize that that happens, right? We're human, we're not perfect, to reflect on it as you suggested. And here's the part that takes some courage. Own it, go back to your child. There is no statute of limitations on apologies. You want to talk about good modeling? Model this kind of humility,
Mm-hmm.
model reflection. When you go back to your toddler, child, teenager, or adult child and say, you know, I've thought about our conversation yesterday. And first of all, I know I sort of flipped out and I apologize for raising my voice because I think it made us both uncomfortable. And I have to think some more about what sort of raw nerve was struck. But first, I want to say that I apologize for my choice of words or I apologize for my tone. What you're modeling there, of course, is, as you suggested in your question, broadly speaking, you're modeling emotional intelligence. You're also modeling, humility and kindness. You're modeling this sort of self-reflection and introspection, which is each person's own best source of data about how to be better on Tuesday than you were on Monday. And, you know, a lot of parents worry, if I go to my 3-year-old or my 5-year-old or my 13-year-old and say, I apologize for my tone, or I apologize for what I said, that my child will have less respect for me.
Mhm.
Paradoxically, they will have much more respect for you because you clearly are thinking about the relationship that you're nurturing with them more than just that angry interaction. You've been thinking about it for hours. You've been thinking about it for days. As I said, no statute of limitations on apologies. You can say, I know we had that conversation a week ago, but I'm still thinking about it and I apologize for X. Or maybe it doesn't involve an apology. Maybe it just involves a reflection. Maybe you
Yeah.
didn't do anything that in your best assessment of your own parenting was off base, but you are reflecting on, also, as your question suggested, that it pushed a button or it triggered you or it scraped a raw nerve. And there's a lot that we can learn as caregivers about times when anybody, including one of our kids, pushes our buttons, right?
Mhm.
And I think the thing to first ask yourself as a parent, as a primary caregiver, is what actually was the trigger? What was the thing that my child said or did? And it could be something as subtle as, I was fine. We were having this conversation. It was intense, but it was civil. And as soon as they rolled their eyes, I just went through the roof. And so what it is for you with the eye roll is a mark of impatience or disrespect.
Mhm.
And, nobody likes that. But why was it the thing that sent you through the roof? And that's something that,
It's
whether it's
deeper.
talking with another trusted adult or
Yeah.
meditating on or talking with your therapist about, what was it in your personal history
Mhm.
that was thematically related to feeling or having the feeling that somebody else was getting impatient or somebody
Yeah.
else was not listening or somebody else was not taking you seriously. So as you said, does that dynamic mirror something that, happened in your childhood
Right.
and is now being replayed? So it could be almost any situation. Someone gives you the eye roll, you're going to lose your junk.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you got to know that. You got to know that about
And
yourself. It makes you a
and
better parent.
I think, you had mentioned after you're triggered, having that inner dialogue kind of come out into the conversation.
Mm,
Excuse me. I also think too often, I'm not a parent yet, but even with myself, I think we try to hold back that reaction whenever we're triggered,
mhm.
trying to keep it under control, but it builds and builds, and then we just react. What I have learned that has worked very well for me is immediately when I feel that emotion kick in, before it turns into that big trigger for me, I will know that that is going to trigger me. And so I make it a verbal, I verbally tell my husband, I've had a really stressful day today. The kitchen's a mess. If I walk past this, it's going to really make me upset. Would you please help me out by cleaning the kitchen? Because that's a trigger for me. And so I talk about what I'm about to feel because I know it. And I think if parents would do that initially and say, if they've had a rough day and they assume their kids are going to be rambunctious and noisy, say, hey, look, mom or dad's had a really stressful day and I can feel a headache coming on. Would you help me out? Will you help mom or dad out by maybe being a little bit quieter, or maybe taking that outside today to really help me? That way you're bringing them into that. And kids love to help,
Yeah.
you know? So instead of waiting for them to do something and then saying, cool it, you're giving me a headache. No, you were getting that headache before that happened.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's a wonderful, what you just described you do with yourself is a great way to, slow down the percolating of the emotional volcano that we all sometimes feel
Yeah.
beginning to erupt inside us. And you do it by taking a breath, as you said, and just verbalizing what's been going on, how you're feeling now. And I mean, it's a great skill. It's a wonderful skill. And, not many adults would be willing to say, I'm putting myself on timeout, especially in front of their kids. I mean, I guess I sometimes did, but more often, and with my spouse and with my kids, or even sometimes my colleagues, I will say, I got to think about this for a second. It's right now got too many pieces for me to think clearly about. Can we take a 2-minute break and pick up where we left off?
Yeah.
And, you'd be surprised at how that can shift the unhealthy pressure that people are feeling into some healthy pressure. So we're not going to lower our standards. We're not going to change what our goal was. It's wonderful that and totally reasonable that you want the kitchen clean. It's great that you want, the kids to be quiet, or it could be anything. It's usually not the sort of outcome or the expectation or the standard that we're holding. Instead, it's thinking clearly and working in healthy ways with the people we're closest with to help achieve those goals. And again, in Hank's original research that he did for performing under pressure, you look at the highest pressure situations for, say, professional athletes. It's the down to the last second in the championship, game 7 of NBA finals. What are the chances that someone's going to make a fairly easy, obviously you can tell I'm not a professional basketball player because I don't think any of these shots are fairly easy, but that they're going to be able to make a jump shot or a layup that they normally would make. Well, as it turns out, in those highest pressure situations, shot percentage and accuracy actually goes down. And so, of course, we all remember some championship game or contest where in an ultra high pressure situation, somebody performed extremely well. And those become these indelible flashbulb memories, but we generalize them in a totally inaccurate way when we say, oh, the higher the pressure, the more, the better the person will perform. And actually, when going back to the argument scenario, or what could turn out to be a really uncomfortable interaction between you and your husband about the state of the kitchen, or between me and my wife about, the state of our kitchen, can, those are high pressure relationship moments, right? So nobody's going to win a contest, but, there's a lot at stake in terms of how you feel about each other. We're not our best selves in those moments. It's really healthy to do what you suggested and take a deep breath and just talk about how you feel, enlist the other person's cooperation, or take more than a breath and say, I want to come back to this. I'm not huffing out and slamming the door. I'm just saying, let me go upstairs, change my clothes. And when I come back down, happy to help you with, this duplicate bill that arrived from Comcast or something, but it is, to return to the theme of our conversation, such a wonderfully emotionally intelligent thing to do, to have the self-awareness that you're describing, and everyone in their own way give themselves a little bit of a break. When we're experiencing intense emotions, whether positive or negative, we're not thinking clearly.
Right.
Think about the last time you felt frustrated because you were stuck in traffic and you were late for an appointment. I know I've done things like bang on the steering wheel that make no logical sense, right? And fortunately, not other people in the car, but it's not going to clear traffic because you banged on the steering wheel. And again, you can vent, that's okay, but we're not thinking clearly. It could be an intense positive emotion. If you like roller coasters, next time you're on a roller coaster, when it goes down that first, dip, try doing some long division in your head. You can't, right? You could do it when you're standing on the ground, but when our limbic system, the part of our brain that regulates emotions, is intensely activated, it kind of hijacks the other parts of our brain. Yeah, your frontal lobes, right? So your frontal lobes go offline. You basically, are not as logical and clear a planner. You don't
Mhm.
inhibit your impulses. That's why when we're angry, we say things that we, 5 minutes later think, oh gosh, I can't believe I
Or
said
back
that.
to your point, when we're super excited, if you're in a really good mood that day, you may be in the store with your child. And it's like, yeah, get whatever you want, you know?
Right, right.
And then later you're like, why did I let them get that? Now
You
they're
are
going
ready to be a parent. Yeah, yeah.
to.
No, it's true. And look, all of this is a kind of self-awareness. And I think I want to return to a point that you made earlier, which is how much stock parents need to put in their child's self-report of this is how your parenting feels, right? And boy, that is a that feels like a very risky question for parents to ask. So, hey, we've just had a conversation about what colleges you're applying to and kind of made a preliminary list of 20, and we need to narrow that down to 10. I just want to ask you, in the last hour while we've been talking about this, what are you feeling is the vibe from me as your parent? Are you feeling like, uh, am I really pointing you in a particular direction, or do you feel like you're the one getting to make the choices? Am I imposing a lot of my own sort of desires on a process which ultimately is your choice and your process? And that does feel risky, because your child could say, well, dad, mom, to tell you the truth, um, yeah, it's kind of this, you're kind of like, I know you wish you had gone to the University of Maine, or, you know,
Wherever, yeah.
wherever. Yeah, I grew up in Maine, so I'm referencing universities in Maine. But it's, if the child is able to say, I really, I'm glad you asked, because I'm really not interested in being an ice hockey player, and I can't see myself going to the University of Maine. And,
I
but
don't want to be a legacy to your fraternity or sorority.
yeah, right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's really, I mean, it's really important, um, that we focus some time on asking our kids, how is it feeling?
And then
Which is, of
ask
course,
ourselves,
yeah.
why are we afraid to get that feedback?
Ah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
This has been amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. I am so looking forward to your book coming out so others can read it. I had the pleasure of being a beta reader, which
Yes.
was phenomenal. I'm so glad that I can kind of help you guys promote
Yeah.
this on the podcast. Because again, reading this book and not being a parent myself, you can apply this to your relationship. You can apply this to your colleagues if you're a leader. I know, Hank brought that from
Hmm.
his other book. What did you say that was? Performing
Performing
Under
under
Pressure?
pressure.
Yeah. So it kind of all goes together. And
Hmm.
I think it's a beautiful blend, again, of data,
Hmm.
examples, and practical tips and strategies. So
Well,
I
thank you.
hope
It
the
makes me
book
feel
does
so
really
good
well.
to
It's
hear you
amazing.
say, well, thank you. I really do feel good when I hear people say that they liked the book, but I feel so much better hearing what you just said, which is the examples were helpful and applicable to other domains of, of your life, besides parenting. And
Yeah.
so I'm grateful to have been a guest on the podcast. Hopefully come back sometime.
The pleasure was all mine, for sure. And I'd love to have you back. I think there's so many things that we can dive into and pick
Awesome.
apart. This has been a great conversation.
Well, thanks
Thank
for
you so
having me.
much.